It was a typical Wednesday evening, one of those nights where you're caught in the monotony of routine, but something feels just a little. My wife Claire had texted earlier, saying she'd be working late again. Big project at the office, she claimed, her message punctuated with a quick smiley face emoji that felt more like a period than reassurance. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, she'd been pulling long hours at her marketing firm for months. I decided to grab dinner at Mel's Diner in Los Angeles, a place we'd frequented together in happier times. The red leather booths, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the faint hum of a jukebox playing Sweet Caroline used to feel comforting. But that night, it felt hollow. I sat alone at our usual booth, the one by the window where we'd always joke about people watching. The waitress Donna noticed me sitting there without Claire and asked, "Flying solo tonight?" Her question stung more than it should have. "Yeah, she's working late again," I replied, forcing a smile. Donna gave a knowing nod, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of pity or maybe suspicion, that lingered with me. It wasn't like Claire to miss out on our midweek tradition. She loved the meatloaf here, often joking it tasted better than her mom's. But lately, she seemed to miss everything that once mattered to us. As I poked at my BLT, my mind wandered back to the little things I'd brushed off. There was the new perfume she started wearing, a floral scent far removed from her usual clean, citrusy favorite. Then there were the sudden work trips to San Francisco, always scheduled last minute, with no real explanation beyond client meetings. She even stopped texting me during the day, a stark contrast to the constant stream of memes and updates we used to share. After finishing dinner, I paid the check and decided to head home, but a nagging feeling kept me restless. Instead of going straight to bed, I curled up on the couch with a beer and flipped through our old photos. There we were at Pike Place Market in Seattle, holding hands as we shared a bowl of clam chowder. Another picture of us at Central Park during the fall, laughing as a street performer serenaded us with Sinatra's "New York, New York." What had changed? When did we go from being that couple to strangers passing each other in the hallway? The night deepened, but my unease only grew. Around 10:30 p.m., Claire finally walked through the door. She looked exhausted, her hair slightly disheveled, but there was something else, a flicker of guilt in her eyes. She kissed me on the cheek, muttering, "Long day," before disappearing into the shower. I wanted to ask her about it, to push for answers, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there in silence, listening to the water running, the sound both soothing and deafening. Maybe it was nothing, I told myself. Maybe I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew this night was different. It was the night that planted a seed of doubt I couldn't ignore. It wasn't the first time she'd come home late, but it was the first time it felt like she wasn't coming home to me. Something was happening, and whether I liked it or not, this was just the beginning. The annual office holiday party was supposed to be a night of celebration. Claire had mentioned it in passing, suggesting I tag along since plus ones were welcome. At the time, it seemed like a good opportunity to meet her coworkers, to step into her world for an evening. Little did I know this party would offer more insight than I ever expected, and not the kind I was hoping for. The event was held at an upscale rooftop venue in downtown Los Angeles. The city lights sparkled against the night sky, and the ambience was straight out of a lifestyle magazine. Fairy lights draped over sleek furniture, waiters weaving through the crowd with trays of champagne, and a DJ spinning a mix of upbeat pop songs. Claire looked stunning in a black cocktail dress that I hadn't seen her wear before. "Bought it just for tonight," she'd said with a sly smile. When we arrived, she introduced me to her boss, Mr. Hargrove, and a few co-workers. Everyone seemed friendly, but the conversations felt surface level, like they were tiptoeing around something unsaid. I brushed it off as nerves. After all, I didn't know these people, and they didn't know me. Then I noticed Claire's interactions with a colleague named Ryan. He was tall, charming, and had that effortless confidence that instantly put people at ease. Claire laughed at his jokes. A little too much, if I'm being honest. At one point, she even reached out to touch his arm during a story he was telling about a client pitch. It wasn't anything overtly inappropriate, but it felt intimate. As the night wore on, Claire seemed to drift further from me. She mingled effortlessly with her coworkers, leaving me by the bar nursing my second glass of whiskey. I struck up a conversation with a woman named Karen, who worked in HR. She was polite but had a knack for subtle digs. "So you're Claire's husband," she said, tilting her head. "She's told us so much about you." "Oh yeah? Like what?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Karen hesitated, her smile faltering for a moment before she continued. "Just that you're really supportive of her work and everything." Her tone was odd, like there was something she wanted to say but couldn't. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Before I could press further, Claire appeared at my side, smiling brightly as she handed me a small plate of hors d'oeuvres. "Having fun?" she asked, her voice overly cheerful. "Yeah," I lied. Later in the evening, there was a toast, and Mr. Hargrove raised his glass to celebrate the team's accomplishments. Ryan was singled out for his contributions to a big account they'd landed. Claire clapped enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling as she looked at him. I couldn't help but feel like I was on the outside looking in, like I didn't belong in this part of her life. The final straw came when Claire disappeared for nearly half an hour. I wandered through the venue searching for her, and eventually found her on the balcony with Ryan. They were standing close, their conversation low and intense. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way she leaned toward him made my chest tighten. When she saw me, her expression shifted instantly. "Oh, there you are," she said, forcing a laugh. "Ryan was just telling me about his trip to New York last month." "Right," I said, my voice flat. I didn't make eye contact with Ryan as I pulled Claire back inside. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Claire chatted casually about the party, but her words felt hollow. I kept replaying the evening in my head, the way she interacted with Ryan, the look on Karen's face when she mentioned my support. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a collection of small red flags, each one adding to the growing suspicion that my wife was keeping secrets. For the first time, I wondered if her late nights at the office and last-minute business trips were more than just a demanding job. I didn't bring it up that night. Instead, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, while Claire slept soundly beside me. The party had opened a door I couldn't close, and the questions it raised refused to be ignored. Who was my wife when I wasn't around? And how much of her life had I been blind to? Doubt is a relentless companion. Once it takes root, it grows like a weed, choking out every moment of trust. After that strange Wednesday night, I started noticing the little things I had overlooked before. Those breadcrumbs that, when pieced together, began painting a picture I wasn't ready to see. It started innocently enough. Claire left her phone on the counter one evening while she showered. I'd never been one to snoop. In fact, I prided myself on our mutual respect for privacy. But as her phone buzzed with a notification, curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't a name I recognized, Sam D. And the message was cryptic. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait for next time." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Could this Sam be a coworker? A client? Or was it something far worse? My chest felt tight, but I didn't open the message. I told myself I'd confront her later, but deep down I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I was overreacting? The breadcrumbs didn't stop there. A few days later, I found a receipt stuffed in the glove compartment of her car while looking for her insurance papers. It was from a trendy restaurant in Austin, Texas. Odd duck. I'd never heard of it, but the date on the receipt made my stomach drop. It coincided with one of her so-called work trips. The kicker? The receipt was for 2 entrees, 2 cocktails, and a shared dessert. My mind reeled as I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had dinner with a colleague? A client? But why wouldn't she mention it? I remembered the last time she returned from Austin. She had brought me a souvenir, a keychain of the Texas state flag, along with stories of grueling meetings. She never once mentioned dinner at a fancy restaurant. That weekend, I decided to dig deeper. I waited until she was out running errands and went through her drawers in the bedroom. Among the usual clutter of scarves and socks, I found a small, crumpled envelope tucked into the corner. It was from the Drake Hotel in Chicago. Inside was a note written in unfamiliar handwriting. counting down the days until I see you again. Sam? I felt like I couldn't breathe. My suspicions were no longer just paranoia. They were solidifying into something undeniable. Claire was hiding something, or someone. The final breadcrumb came when I checked our shared credit card statement. I wasn't actively spying. I just needed to confirm a charge for a recent home repair. But as I scanned the list of transactions, one stood out. Joe's Seafood, Prime Steak, and Stone Crab, Las Vegas. Claire hadn't mentioned being in Las Vegas. In fact, I was pretty sure she'd told me she was in Denver that weekend, attending a conference. The details were piling up, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a coincidence. There was a pattern, a trail of breadcrumbs that led straight to betrayal. Still, I held back. I didn't want to confront her without knowing the full truth. I started casually asking her about her trips, her dinners, and her work events, trying to gauge her responses. Each time she'd smile and give a vague but seemingly plausible answer. But her eyes told a different story, one of deflection and unease. One night I mentioned the restaurant receipt I found in her car. "Odd duck," I said casually, watching her reaction. "Is that a good spot? I've heard Austin has great food." For a split second her expression faltered. "Oh yeah," she said quickly, "it's okay. I went there with a few coworkers last time I was in town." "Why?" "Just curious," I replied, forcing a smile. But inside, my suspicions were confirmed. She was lying. I couldn't believe this was my life, playing detective in my own marriage, searching for clues in places I never thought I'd have to look. Every breadcrumb I found chipped away at the foundation of our relationship, leaving me teetering on the edge of confrontation. I knew I couldn't keep following this trail forever. Sooner or later I'd reach the end, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face what I'd find. But one thing was clear, the truth was out there, waiting for me to uncover it. And with each passing day, I grew more determined to see it through. I knew the confrontation was inevitable. The breadcrumbs had led me this far, and it felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at a truth I could no longer ignore. My suspicions reached a boiling point when Claire mentioned she had to work late, again. This time, something in her tone felt different. It wasn't just her words, it was her body language, the way she avoided eye contact as she grabbed her coat and left without the usual goodbye kiss. I decided that night would be the night. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I waited for about 30 minutes after she left, just enough time to ensure she was settled wherever she was going. Then, I grabbed my jacket and car keys and headed out. Her late-night office excuse had worn thin, so I drove straight to the parking lot near her firm. The lot was almost empty, except for a few cars that likely belonged to the janitorial staff. Claire's car wasn't there. I felt a mix of panic and anger bubbling up inside me. Where could she be? My mind raced as I thought about the breadcrumbs I had collected, the receipts, the messages, the lies. One place stood out, Bistro Paradiso, a quaint little spot downtown that Claire had mentioned once in passing. "It's the perfect date night place," she'd said while scrolling through her phone. I never thought much of it at the time, but now, the thought made my stomach turn. I drove to the bistro, my heart pounding with every passing block. When I arrived, the parking lot was full, and the warm glow of string lights spilled out onto the sidewalk. It looked like the kind of place where people fell in love over candlelit dinners and shared bottles of wine. But for me, it would become a place where something shattered. I parked across the street and sat in my car for a moment, trying to calm the storm inside me. Through the large windows, I could see couples laughing, leaning in close, completely absorbed in each other. Then I saw her. Claire was sitting at a table near the window, her back to me. She wasn't alone. Across from her was a man, mid-30s, with a sharp suit and an easy smile. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her palm. She smiled back, the kind of smile she hadn't given me in months. My chest tightened as I watched them, their heads close together, laughing softly. It felt surreal, like I was watching a movie where I was the antagonist in someone else's love story. The man said something, and Claire threw her head back, laughing in a way I hadn't seen her do in years. I didn't think. I just acted. I got out of the car and crossed the street, my footsteps heavy with anger and heartbreak. As I entered the bistro, the hostess greeted me, but I waved her off. My eyes were locked on Claire and her companion. "Claire," I said, my voice steady but low. Her head snapped up, her face draining of color. "Mark," she stammered, pulling her hand away from the man's grasp. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my eyes darting to the man, who looked both confused and uncomfortable. "Is this your big project at the office?" The man stood up, clearly sensing the tension. "I think I should go," he said, grabbing his coat. "No," I said sharply, my gaze fixed on Claire. "Stay. I'd love to know who you are and why you're having dinner with my wife." Claire stood as well, her hands trembling. "Mark, let's talk about this outside," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. But I wasn't ready to leave. "Talk about what, Claire? The lies? The nights you said you were working late while you were here with him?" The other diners were starting to notice, their conversations fading as they watched the scene unfold. Claire looked mortified, her eyes darting around the room. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. Reluctantly, I followed her outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. We stood on the sidewalk, just far enough from the bistro to avoid the stares of the patrons inside. "Mark, I'm sorry," she began, tears welling in her eyes. "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. "Don't say you're sorry. Say what you've been hiding. Who is he? How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, her lips trembling. "His name is Sam," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible. "We met a few months ago at a work event." "A few months?" I repeated, my voice rising. "So all this time, every late night, every trip, you've been with him?" "It's not like that," she said quickly, her tears falling freely now. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I just felt so disconnected from us. I didn't know how to fix it." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Disconnected? I thought about all the nights I waited for her, all the times I tried to bridge the growing distance between us. And now, here we were, standing in the street outside a bistro where she'd shared her heart with someone else. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said, my voice breaking. She reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "Mark, please," she said, "let's talk. We can work through this." But I couldn't. Not then. Not after everything I'd just seen and heard. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there under the glow of the bistro's lights. As I got into my car and drove off, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The breadcrumbs had led me here, to the truth I had dreaded but needed to find. And now, there was no turning back. The drive home from the bistro was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, as if the act of holding on would stop me from falling apart. The streets of downtown blurred past me, their familiar glow now tinged with a sharp bitterness. My mind replayed every moment at the bistro on an endless loop. Claire's guilty face, the man's uncomfortable exit, her whispered pleas. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the silence of our home felt deafening. This was the place where we had built our life together, filled with late-night conversations, shared dreams, and laughter. Now, it felt like a hollow shell, a cruel monument to everything we had lost. I sat in the car for what felt like an eternity, staring at the porch light that Claire always insisted we leave on. It was a small detail, one that used to make the house feel welcoming. Now it just mocked me, a reminder of the facade we'd been maintaining for months. When I stepped inside, the emptiness hit me like a tidal wave. Her shoes were by the door, her jacket draped over the back of a chair, mundane signs of her presence, but they felt foreign now. I didn't know how to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one I'd confronted just hours ago. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the couch, staring at the dark screen of the TV, lost in my thoughts. The anger, hurt, and betrayal churned inside me, a storm I couldn't escape. Questions plagued me. Had I missed the signs earlier? Was I not enough for her? Could this have been prevented if I'd tried harder? The next morning, Claire came home. I heard the door creak open and her hesitant footsteps as she entered. She looked as broken as I felt, her eyes red and swollen, Her shoulders slumped with the weight of what she'd done. "Mark," she said softly, standing at the edge of the living room. I didn't respond, didn't even look at her. I couldn't. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust. Stop," I said, cutting her off. My voice was cold, devoid of the warmth it used to carry for her. "I don't want to hear your excuses or your apologies. Not now." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll pack a bag," she whispered, turning to leave. I didn't stop her. As much as it hurt, I needed space. We both did. Over the next few days, the house felt unbearably quiet. I found myself replaying memories of our life together, our first date at a tiny diner in Nashville, the road trip to the Grand Canyon where we argued over the playlist, the lazy Sundays spent watching old movies on the couch. Those memories felt like they belonged to a different couple, people who were in love and invincible. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work and spending hours at the gym. But no matter what I did, the heartbreak lingered. Friends called, offering their support, but I couldn't bring myself to share the full story. How do you explain that the person you trusted most in the world had betrayed you? One evening, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There we were, smiling at a barbecue with friends, hiking in Colorado, celebrating anniversaries. I couldn't reconcile those happy moments with the betrayal I'd uncovered. Was it all a lie? Or had something changed along the way, something I failed to see? I started therapy, desperate to make sense of the tangled mess of emotions. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Bennett, helped me unpack the guilt and self-doubt that had been eating away at me. "Infidelity isn't about you," she said during one session. "It's about the choices Claire made. You're not responsible for her actions." Her words helped, but the healing process was slow. I still felt the ache of loss every time I walked past the empty side of the closet or sat down at the dining table set for one. Claire reached out a few times, sending long emails that I couldn't bring myself to read. She said she wanted to explain, to try and repair what was left of our relationship. But I wasn't ready to face her, not yet. The hardest part was letting go of the future I had imagined for us. I had pictured growing old together, traveling the world, maybe even starting a family. Now, those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else, a version of me that no longer existed. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild. It wasn't easy, and the scars of betrayal didn't fade overnight. But slowly, I started to find pieces of myself again. I reconnected with friends, took up hobbies I'd abandoned, and even adopted a dog, a scrappy little terrier named Max, who brought a surprising amount of joy into my life. The aftermath of Claire's betrayal was devastating, but it also forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. I learned that healing isn't linear, that it's okay to grieve, and that I deserved better than half-truths and empty promises. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The heartbreak had changed me, but it hadn't broken me, and that, I realized, was the first step toward moving on. The morning light streamed through the curtains, painting the walls with a warmth that felt almost cruel. It had been weeks since the confrontation at the bistro, but the pain still lingered, like a bruise that refused to fade. I woke up each day in the same empty house, haunted by the echoes of what used to be. But this morning felt different. For the first time, I didn't feel crushed by the weight of it all. It was a faint feeling, a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time. The hope. The first step in picking up the pieces was creating a routine. My therapist, Dr. Bennett, had suggested it during one of our sessions. "Structure brings stability," she'd said. So I committed to it. I started waking up at the same time every day, making my bed, and brewing a cup of coffee, not for anyone else, just for me. It was a small act, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Work became a welcome distraction. I poured my energy into projects that had been gathering dust, taking on new challenges and even volunteering for tasks I would have avoided before. My coworkers noticed the change. "You've been killing it lately," my manager said during a team meeting. I smiled, but inside, I knew the truth. It wasn't about impressing anyone else. It was about proving to myself that I could move forward. Evenings were the hardest. The quiet moments, when the world slowed down, brought memories rushing back. To combat the loneliness, I started spending time at a local cafe, Maple and Main. It was a cozy spot with mismatched furniture and the best chai lattes I'd ever tasted. The owner, a kind woman named Ellen, always greeted me with a warm smile. Over time, the cafe became a refuge, a place where I could sit with my thoughts without feeling consumed by them. One evening at the cafe, I struck up a conversation with a fellow regular, a man named Chris. He was a graphic designer, always sketching in a notebook while sipping his espresso. We bonded over our shared love of indie films and bad puns. It wasn't a romantic connection, but it was the first meaningful friendship I'd formed since everything fell apart. I also started journaling, something I hadn't done since college. At first it felt awkward, like talking to a stranger. But as the days went by, the pages filled with my thoughts, fears, and dreams. Writing became a way to process the tangled emotions that therapy couldn't always untangle. One night, while flipping through my journal, I came across an entry I had written the day after the confrontation. I don't know who I am without her. It was startling to read, a stark reminder of how lost I had felt. But the words no longer resonated with me. Slowly, I had started to find myself again. Friends and family played a crucial role in my recovery. My sister Jenna showed up unannounced one weekend with a suitcase in hand. "I'm here to babysit you," she declared, plopping down on the couch with a tub of ice cream. We spent the weekend binge watching old sitcoms and laughing until our sides hurt. It was the kind of simple joy I hadn't realized I needed. One of the most surprising sources of comfort was Max, the scrappy terrier I had impulsively adopted from a local shelter. He was a ball of energy, always wagging his tail and demanding attention. Taking care of him gave me a sense of purpose, and his goofy antics never failed to make me smile. As the weeks turned into months, I started to see the world differently. The betrayal had shattered my old life, but it also gave me the opportunity to rebuild, this time with intention. I began exploring hobbies I'd long forgotten about. I joined a local hiking group and found solace in the quiet beauty of nature. I signed up for a cooking class, where I discovered that I actually enjoyed experimenting in the kitchen. There were setbacks, of course. Some days, the weight of it all would come crashing back, triggered by a song on the radio or a stray thought. But those moments became fewer and farther between. And when they did come, I reminded myself of how far I'd come. One evening, while cleaning out the attic, I came across an old photo album. Inside were pictures of Claire and me during happier times. Our wedding day, vacations, lazy Sundays at home. I expected the photos to reopen old wounds, but instead, they brought a sense of closure. Those moments were real, and they had been beautiful in their own way. But they were also in the past, and it was time to let them stay there. The last piece of the puzzle was forgiving myself. I had spent so much time blaming myself for what had happened, wondering if I could have done something differently. But through therapy and reflection, I realized that Claire's choices weren't a reflection of my worth. Letting go of that guilt was liberating. One day, I returned to Maple and Main, the cafe that had become my second home. As I sipped my chai latte, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. I wasn't fully healed, maybe I never would be, but I was okay. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. Picking up the pieces hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. The betrayal had broken me, but it had also forced me to grow. And as I looked out the cafe window at the bustling street below, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope for the future.